Hello, boils and ghouls and non-binary creatures of the night. Pup Jared and my friend Ryan the Lion.
Rawr.
And we're actually going to talk about doing something I love doing for fun, which is actually painting Jason masks. So here's actually some examples of ones I've painted in the past. This one was meant to be a more traditional Jason mask, but done in the 8-bit Jason NES colors. I have the axe wound from After 3, because honestly, like 4 is probably my favorite mask. And then just kind of did the blue color scheme. This one was just fun. I threw glitter at it. I did like a little rainbow. It glows in the dark. It's UV reactive. It's insane, but I just had fun with it. And that's kind of the thing with the Jason mask is you can do more serious stuff. You can do more like screen accurate replicas. You can just do whatever you want artistically. There are a lot of people online who make masks, who have better tutorials, and who have more talent than me. You can also, if you have no artistic talent and don't have the patience for arts and crafts, you can actually buy tons of pre-made masks from places like Etsy and stuff. But honestly, they are not hard to do. They're also not expensive, or at least as expensive as you'd think. These are super freaking cheap $5 masks that I got the day after Halloween at the local drugstore, literally for like $4.99. They're super cheap, plastic. But what's nice is they're really easy to just kind of sand down and use as a base and then paint whatever you want on them. So you're not spending a ton of money, especially if it's your first time like painting a mask or something like that. So the first step I kind of already mentioned, but it's actually going to be sanding these down. They have a kind of plastic coating, and so paint won't really easily adhere to these. So I recommend at the very least sanding them. Some will paint directly on it after that. Others will actually use primer first. In this case, I'm going to sand and skip primer. For his design, he's going to sand and use primer. So you'll kind of get to see both. But the first step, sand it down. As I was saying before I disappeared and this stuff magically appeared, you need sandpaper. You have to sand these down or the paint won't adhere. Don't go too fine. You want a little abrasion, especially if you're trying to do a more like withered mask. Don't go too rough unless you're trying to really make your mask look torn up. Medium is usually fine, but don't go too fine with it. Go ahead and hold that. Usually when I am sanding, I don't have like a ton of tools. I'll just buy a cheap thing of like sandpaper. I will roll it around in objects, and here I'm using a box of crowns. Really simple. And then make sure to attach in plastic things.
All right, and now basically you just want to sand it down a little. Make sure you're getting all of the plastic, the shiny parts. So it'll be really shiny. You want to like get that down so it's rough and you get that rough texture. That way the paint will actually adhere. So you really want to make sure there's no shiny parts and you're really sanding those down. And also make sure you get the edges really good.
Okay, so once you finish sanding, you should have a bit of a rougher texture. If you're going to use primer, which he is, you don't have to be as thorough with it. Mine, I have to make sure that all of it is really sanded off that top shiny coating. That way paint will actually take to it. My design is actually going to use a lot of the kind of yellowish color of the mask. His is actually going to be black for the base. So he'll be using like a kind of a black painter and then black primer and then painting on top of it. Because he's using primer though, you want to be able to cover up the little metal things so they're not going to get primer on it. So you're just going to take painter's tape and basically just kind of crumple it up, wrap it around, and then kind of squeeze it in tight so it's just covering the edges of the little divots. That way you don't get primer on those themselves. And then he managed to break his little strap thing. So the top one came out. We can fix it later. We'll just use glue. But normally you would just unbuckle these before you're sanding and priming. They're just buttons, so they should pop right off. Obviously not super expensive, so his kind of broke because not super well made for a $5 mask.
Quick question from a lion.
Yes.
What happens if you bought a cheap mask and all of the edges are really sharp?
Sand them down. Really simple. The eyes on this one were actually kind of sharp and had some parts sticking out, so we just stuck some sandpaper and went around and rotated in there. He'll tape off the other two things, and then we'll go outside and paint it with primer. Yay! So you're going to start with just primer. I'm using kind of a black primer for this one. You can use any color primer. There's clear primers. You can get ones that are actually kind of this cream hockey mask color. But you just want something to adhere the paint to. Like I said, for the other one, we're not going to put any primer on it. I'm going to paint directly on the mask. For this one, we're going to do a coat of primer first. Pop open the thing. Shake it really well. And then you're going to do little ways away, and you're going to do kind of soft, even sprays. And then kind of come in from the sides. The other side. And you want just kind of a soft, even coat on it. And there you go. It is coated. So the dry times are going to vary. It's going to be dependent on temperature, etc. Primer usually dries faster than just spray paint. So like if you're just spray painting a mask, it'll usually take longer to dry before you can do things like sandpaper it down or add other paints on top. For this one specifically, it's going to take 20 minutes to dry, but we can actually handle it in an hour. We might come back, and depending on if there's spots we missed, do a quick recoat, but in about an hour we can start painting on it. But yeah, now we just let it dry. For mine, just because I don't need to use the primer, I'm actually just going to draw on the lines that I'm going to paint in a little bit. And I actually created a really simple mock-up on the computer of kind of what I want to do. If you can't tell, it's inspired by Glamrock Freddy. But I am going to simply just draw on the lines that I'm going to be painting over. It's fairly simple. I just use a normal pencil and draw directly on the mask. It should stick out just because you scratched it up with the sandpaper. All right, so like I said, just take a pencil and you're going to kind of start drawing your lines where you want. I'm actually going to kind of use the chevron as the guide for mine, just because kind of simple, easy idea of where to put this circle. It kind of gives me a slight base of how I want to do this curve. And I want to kind of do curve around like that. And you don't have to be exact because you're painting over these lines. So if it's not exactly precise, you can kind of clean it up as you're painting. Just kind of depends on kind of your painting style and how precise you want it. So I'm kind of doing where it's going to go, and I'll do the same on the other side. Hard part is trying to get it symmetrical. There are easier ways of doing that, but I like to freehand everything. Some people will take like a piece of paper and cut it off on one side so they can trace it and then flip it so it's even. I'm like doing things the hard way, so I'm just going to freehand it. Because that's what I do. And I kind of put the lightning bolt here, even though it's on Freddy's chest. One, because it's kind of symbolic of him, and two, it kind of echoes the chunk of the mask that's missing for Jason later on. And then there'll just be the kind of stripe here up the middle, which I'll put, let's do kind of the middle there and do just right there. So I'll have kind of like that. And then from there, I'll just start painting directly on the mask now that I have kind of my design done. All right, so primer is completely done. It's dried. You'll see it's kind of a little rougher. He is doing kind of a Miles Morales mask, so he's going to use kind of this as the black and then paint the other colors on top. Do you want to show him kind of what you're doing with this? He just took a sandpaper that we used and is cutting it out into the eye shape to use as a template to make sure both sides are even. And then he'll just kind of trace around that, and then he'll start painting Obviously, because I didn't have to wait for the primer to dry, I'm a little ahead of the game because I've already kind of drawn my stuff on. The other thing we're going to actually be doing is if you want color behind here instead of just the see-through and seeing the eyes, you can get like these little craft plastic things that have just the mesh cut out this kind of sunglass shape. And the way it works is it basically just props, I can get this from behind, into here. You'll hot glue it when you're done, and then you have this here. I had this leftover pink. It is not the color I want. I actually want white. So I'm going to just paint over this with some white acrylic paint, let it dry, and then when I put it in here, I'll paint little eyeballs on it, so it'll have like Freddy's eyes on it. With him, he'll just leave it white because it'll be kind of the center of Spider-Man's little eye things. I actually forget what those are called.
Lenses.
Yeah. But we're going to get started painting. I usually will have a glass of water to kind of clean my paintbrushes. Usually just a paper plate or something like that, or if you have like an actual, what's the word again? Mixing thing.
Like palette?
Palette. You can use that, but just something you can kind of put your paints on to mix and kind of dip in as you're working. Also, sometimes I'll kind of go over stuff with markers or things like that if I need to and do like touch-ups. So like I have just a big Sharpie right now. I also have some paint markers I might use in just a bit. But what I'm going to start with is kind of the big colors. So on my design, I have a lot of blue within just red trimming. So I'm actually going to start with the blue and then go back over it with the red trimming once the blue's dried. And then on these, it's going to be black. So I'll probably start with just kind of the Sharpie and get my lines in. And then I can paint it in with black paint. But I'm going to get started on this. What questions do you have?
Question for me. For someone who did do primer, is this a good time to take off this, or should I leave this on?
Yeah, you can take it off now. You'll have probably just around the edges a little bit of areas that aren't painted. You can kind of go back in with just a little bit of black paint if that's what you're using as the same color as your primer, and just kind of coat those little areas. But the main thing is this keeps the actual metal shiny.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see, like, now you have those metal bits that actually still stick out and are shiny.
Yeah, and all of those little areas we can just paint over later,
Yep.
right? Cool.
All right.
Cool.
I will start with this. Will you start your drawing?
Can you hand me the little pencil?
I guess you do. And I'm just going to dip right in here because it's just white. And then... So, kind of skipping ahead a little. Here's the progress on mine so far. I'm starting to paint in the lines, starting to go over with the red. Some of this I'll clear up a little and do another coat once it dries. Once all your paint is actually dried, then we'll move on to the next step, which is actually sealing it. There's a couple options with that are fun. I'm actually going to use like a glow-in-the-dark coat, so the whole thing will glow. There's also like glitter coats, which we may use on his. Ryan, do you want to show where you're at so far?
Yes. So, lots of happy mistakes along the way. But we're getting the red lines down, and we finished out most of the eyes, and we'll probably maybe do a darker layer to make the red actually stand out a lot more. But oh, and I'm doing a little bit of an experiment because I'm mixing both the red paint that we're using, which it's the paint that he has, with some of this glow, so it might actually glow under black light. We don't know if it'll work or not. It might.
Yeah.
It might not glow.
Alright. But yeah, we'll finish up here and then we will cut to adding the next final step, which is just the spray coat over it, and then we'll be done.
Alright, so this is again a simple glow sealant, and I'm spraying over, keeping distance, kind of trying to make sure it's a really even coat. I chose glow in the dark because I freaking love glow in the dark stuff. Like anything black light, glow in the dark just makes me very happy. And this will take a few minutes just to make sure it's really coated and sealed, so make sure it doesn't like crack and paint doesn't chip away. And again, mine has the added bonus of the glow finish, so it will be black light reactive. ta-da! This is the finished product. Both of them, I'm really happy with how they came out. The Miles Morales one, like the lines look really great in person, like even more so than the video, and they glow in blacklight. They actually glow really bright. Like the video does not do it justice, but they are very glowy, and yeah, that is that.